Okay, welcome colleagues to the 15th meeting of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. This is a virtual meeting held during the COVID-19 emergency. City Hall is open to the public with reduced capacity and physical distancing requirements. Meetings can be viewed via live stream on YouTube and the city website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing and advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. And to make a specific request to this meeting, please contact sppc@london.ca. I'll look to colleagues for any disclosures of pecuniary interests based on today's agenda. All right, seeing none, we have 3 consent items. Each of them are received motions, reports to be received. Would any colleagues like those reports dealt with separately? All right, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we could get the climate action plan dealt with separately.
Okay, Councillor Hopkins, was that the same one you were going for? Okay, so it looks like the climate emergency action plan would be dealt with separately. Is there anybody opposed to dealing with 2.1 and 2.3 at the same time? Okay, seeing none, I'll look for a mover for 2.1 and 2.3, which is the municipal accommodation tax report to be received and the strategic plan progress variance report. Moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Any questions or discussion on those 2 items? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think through you, perhaps to Ms. Finn, I see she's on the line here with respect to the municipal accommodation tax. I have 2 questions. One, with respect to the impacts of COVID on these bids specifically. I'd imagine a number of these events and initiatives aren't going to go forward given the COVID context, or maybe significantly altered. What does that do to the bid fees and the expenditures associated with those? I see a lot of those expenditures have already occurred.
Yes, and I'll go to Ms. Cheryl Finn if you're there.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the question. Fortunately, these events have been postponed. That is the strategy that the province has taken, as well as the feds in regards to our industry, in that we are doing our best to postpone as opposed to cancel. Some of them are changed. Those that are occurring within this calendar year have certainly changed their hosting template, and we are working towards supporting that. And also in regards to the fee and revisiting their original application, in that their application for that support, making sure that their mandates are being met.
So thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, if I might, just as a follow-up, just specifically, is there any potential for expenditures realized but events not actualized? So is there potential for money to be lost as a result of this, or is everything all good and moving forward at some point, just maybe not now?
Go ahead, Ms. Finn.
Sorry. Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, they are all going and moving forward at this point.
Any further questions on either 2.1 or 2.3? Again, the municipal accommodation tax annual report and the strategic plans variance report. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I think I'll also direct this to Ms. Finn if she might want to offer a comment or two. In addition to expenditures that alterations may now lead to losses, obviously, I think it's very clear to all of us that the COVID-19 situation has impacted the hospitality industry probably hardest of all. And I wonder if she might just offer us a couple of comments, a little bit of insight about what this may mean for our MAT revenues as we proceed through to the end of this year, in terms of, obviously, the revenues are not going to be what was originally projected. And I wonder if she just wants to offer us a couple comments on that reality facing our hotel and restaurateurs.
Ms. Finn.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lewis, for that question. And yes, the tourism industry was hit first, and it was hit the hardest. It's very much struggling. Our tourism partners are struggling tremendously right now. Anywhere from our accommodation providers to our attraction stakeholders, restaurateurs, everyone associated with tourism is certainly struggling. Our international airport, their business is down 90%. It's dire, dire times. However, in regards to moving forward, we do have a healthy holdback. We were very strategic in terms of how we were managing that fund. Given obviously the situation now, we will not be in a position to collect at this point moving forward. But again, it's relative to the current state in that there aren't any bids coming forward for this year. However, we can build towards future, as we are incredibly lucky to be looking into 22 and beyond and examining RFPs from events rights holders that are coming across our desk.
I have Councillor Squire next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. On a related matter that arises because of this report, I noticed, and I was interested in reading Appendix A, which was the adjudication terms of reference and committee that the Tourism Board had created. I know that we spent our money, our share of the money as a city fairly early, but I just wonder, how are we making progress on ourselves to defining the criteria by which we'll be allocating this money received by the city? I know that we were in the process of doing that, but I just wonder how close we are to finalizing that in the same way that the Tourism Board has.
I think that question is probably for Ms. Barbone, but I'm happy to have her shuffle it off to someone else if appropriate.
Thank you, through the chair. So the city, we had reported back. I'm trying to think, I don't have the report right in front of me, with respect to the process, and that this would be part of the future budget allocations when the funding is available. So the city had clearly identified that the terms for this would flow through the normal capital budget process, and we had identified a number of things that would be spent with respect to potential City of London projects. However, at this time, all of the funds that we have been fully allocated out to 2022. So there will be nothing coming forward until at least the next multi-year budget.
What? Yeah, I just want to go back to my question, which is about, do we have, or are we planning to come back to council with any criteria for the allocation of this money? In other words, how is it going to come forward to us in terms of this specific pot of money? As to how we are going to allocate it so that it meets the requirements of provincial legislation. And because I think it's a special case, and I was under the impression we were going to have some criteria to avoid spending our money in a very short period of time, as we did last time.
For it too. So.
Ms. Barbone.
So through the chair, we had indicated a criteria in terms of anything that was tourism related with respect to municipal capital facilities that would be tourism related. So things that potentially would come forward, we had identified would have to meet the council strategic plan as well as support tourism related. So we do not have specific criteria. We had identified a number of facilities and types of things that could be funded, but they would all be subject to council approval through the budget process, noting that nothing will be coming forward until the next MYB because all the money has been spent.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's interesting that this is the way we're going to proceed with this. It's certainly not what I expected to hear. It's not my recollection of what we did here. I stand to be corrected, but I think the idea that we're going to have this money and we're going to allocate it to the budget process to certain items can be concerning to me. So I'm just going to leave it there. I'm not going to keep following up and sort of getting the same answer, but I'll leave it there.
Okay, other questions or comments on, we have two items on the floor at the moment, municipal accommodation tax and the strategic plan variance report. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is to Ms. Finn as well about the municipal accommodation tax. As of March, City Council has given direction to staff to report back on the possibility of a bylaw coming forward to also apply the municipal accommodation tax to short-term rentals such as Airbnb. And I wonder if the tourism board is keeping abreast of that, and if they have sort of factored into some of their calculations as far as how the fund may grow if we include short-term rentals in the sector that will have this tax applied.
Ms. Finn.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that question, Councillor Cassidy. Yes, we are very well aware of this. And if we were not, our accommodation providers certainly would have made us very much aware of this. However, in terms of looking forward and looking into the crystal ball, and more importantly, budgeting, we do not budget with money we do not have. So that will certainly help. But at this point in looking forward, we work off the data that we currently have.
All good?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other speakers? Okay, I have a motion to receive, the two reports are to be received, 2.1 and 2.3. It's moved and seconded. We're going to open that for voting. Okay, my first time doing this, so Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salih.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kaibaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier. Oh, Councillor Hillier is not here, and I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 12-0.
All right, next we have the 2.2, which is a report on the Climate Emergency Action Plan update. I'll look for a mover and a seconder on receiving this report. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Councillor Turner, you asked for this to be pulled. Would you like to speak to it now? Or?
Sure. Thank you. I think my questions in this, a couple things. When we moved into COVID, we responded very, very quickly. There was a significant threat to the population in general, globally, and impacts locally as well. The amount of shift and the movement that we did was done in kind of record time. The change in our work patterns, the change in our expenditures, the change in our focus and primary objective kind of shifted overnight. The same threat exists on an environmental scale, and climate change poses that same risk, but over a longer period of time. But we haven't seen locally or more globally that same level of interest or action and movement to be able to get ourselves into a position to be able to do a lot of these things that we've identified, but further than that, to actually have a strong and solid plan in place so that we know what those actions are. Every year that we delay, we get closer and closer to, or more and more drastic measures have to be taken. And so I'm concerned about some of these things. I recognize that there's some components that make things difficult for public participation and engagement, but we've also found that there are new ways to engage the public that may be even more effective than what we've been doing traditionally, where people can participate wherever they are, in their backyards, or in different cities, or from wherever. So I have some concerns about where we sit on this. I see it's just a report for receipt, but I'm concerned that we've delayed. I recognize that COVID has impacted this work, but I would say this is as much of an existential threat as COVID is, and it really requires the same level of attention. So I think perhaps I might go through you, Mr. Chair, to ask for staff to provide some sense of where we can accelerate. I think one of the other opportunities through all of this is that our patterns of work have changed significantly. While over the past 5 months, we've seen a fairly significant reduction in vehicle transportation as stage 2 and stage 3 have started to reopen the economy and reopen the way we work, people are returning to old habits. And we had a window of opportunity to try and intervene, to try and get people into habits or procedures or routines that may be less impactful to the environment. We had kind of a 5-month reprieve on our carbon impacts on the environment because people weren't driving as much, because people weren't moving about as much, because people weren't flying as much. How do we move on that? How do we capitalize on that and not lose the momentum that was realized because we had to change our patterns? I'm really scared that we haven't taken the opportunity to retool and see how we can use this as an opportunity. So perhaps for you, Mr. Chair, to staff.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll direct this to Ms. Scher. I realize a number of people are involved in the report, so if you can't answer, maybe feel free to redirect to the appropriate staff members as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, Mr. Barrett would like to provide some framing remarks related to this report, and then we can get into answering some of those questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Barrett.
Thank you. Through the chair and Councillor Turner, a lot of those comments I think they're all very, very true. But at the same time, one of the biggest reasons for the delay is because of all those things that you said. We actually don't know where we're going to land. Opportunities, I would suggest to you, may have been missed as it would relate to make the connection on those changes, to how those connections could be brought forward. But we don't know, and as you say, people are already falling back into their old habits. And it's for that reason, perhaps, and that reason alone, is one of the reasons why we've had the delay. And I do recognize that there are new and emerging ways to talk with people. But one of the things that we highlighted in the very first report that we brought forward is that the City of London, what we actually control ourselves as a corporation, is a very, very small piece of what's required. What's required is that this is the community's plan. And in order to make it the community's plan, we really, really, really need to be able to engage in a meaningful way with the community. And yes, those opportunities are changing, and yes, those opportunities are emerging, but they're also showing actually glaring concerns about issues of social equity. While you say that certainly you can participate in your backyard, that contemplates that in fact you have the technology to participate in your backyard. And that in fact is emerging as one of the things that's coming out of COVID is in fact it's highlighting even more what some of these social inequity issues are. And it's one of the things that we're actually going to have to be very, very mindful about in preparing this plan. So I cannot argue with any of the comments that you've made. However, I would suggest to you that while COVID-19 has been the reason why we put this not on pause, but why it's going to take a little bit longer to get done, it has given us opportunities to see that patterns change, habits change, and they can change. So we know that people can respond. So our challenge now is to ensure that people can carry those habits forward, even though they might not need that threat that came from COVID. It is making them understand that there is still that threat on the climate emergency. The other thing that I would leave you with, and Mr. Stanford and Mr. Fabro can speak more specifically to, how we're going to ramp up and move forward. But the other thing that I would leave you with on this is that we have had the opportunity to get our screening tool very much ready to go. But again, because of COVID, our ability to get together internally as a group to ensure that it is drilled down into the corporation. This is going to be our way of putting that lens on. So when decisions are made, we know what those implications are. And one of the best ways for that is, again, in the same way it is with the community, we've got to do that same thing with our peers and our co-workers in the corporation to make sure there's that understanding as they apply that lens. So that's going to be part of what we're taking this time to do. But we have made success. We are advancing, and we are still hoping to get that plan in front of you. This is a 50-year plan. It's going to change over time. There could be other things like COVID that are going to bring in new shocks to the system that could present new opportunities or new threats on getting to what is our 2050 target of a net zero. And that's our end game. This plan will go through many iterations between now and 2050. But I don't disagree with you that we've got to get moving on it, and we're trying to identify for you in this report how we're going to get moving and advance the plan.
Thanks, Mr. Barrett. Ms. Scher, you said you wanted him to provide some framing comments. Is there further comments that you'd like to make?
No, I think Mr. Barrett has really addressed the situation both with the community and internally to the organization. This is not a planning and engineering exercise. This involves the entire corporation. And that means our friends in facilities and finance and all our other operations need to be part of these ongoing discussions. A lot of work did proceed through this time, but there were certain things that just were not feasible to be working on with the level of interaction we wanted. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Fabro and Mr. Stanford, however, to provide the update on how we're planning to manage the schedule on a go-forward basis.
Okay, go ahead.
It's Jay Stanford here, through the chair. Our report highlights how after this meeting in council next week, we plan on ramping up using available tools. It's a challenge because it accesses many. We anticipate some new faces. The reality is, though, we are still finding our way through engaging with new and important audiences that are out there that we have not been able to reach yet. Our traditional programs through Get Involved are very good, but they are not reaching the audiences that we need to reach here. This has to go much deeper into the community. And in many ways, it can be driven by staff, but we really hope that community associations and businesses become the drivers of this. And that is all part of our strategy in the fall, is to reach them the best we can. But then, as we've often done, is try to indicate, you tell us how we need to go the next step. As Mr. Barrett highlighted, we do have to take some different approaches on this, and it will take time. In our conversation with other municipalities, they're struggling as well, trying to reach the audiences and not the usual folks that we speak with. These are the folks that are already committed, and they've stated that. They're our champions. We've got to create more of those. In our program for the fall, we've laid out some of the key online examples. We're going to be pushing hard on those, and in some respects, relaunching to pick up the momentum that we had in January and February to get that back for the fall, starting late in August, early September.
Councillor Turner?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to all. I certainly don't want to leave the impression that I think that nothing's been done. I think there has been a lot, and I certainly thank you for the progress that has been put forward. I think the screening tool will be essential, and the sooner that even the modified or the first cut at that can start to be applied, the better. I think that that will go a long way. And I certainly am not unsympathetic to the impacts of COVID in terms of how that might affect our operations. I think my question that comes out of this is, in recovery from emergencies, it takes a little while for us to get back onto the feet that we were on before the emergency occurred. And that takes a lot of very purposeful planning, and there's a lot of moving parts. I'm very involved with that at work here, so I can really appreciate that. There are some things that after an emergency or in the waning stages of an emergency, that as we start to take a look at, there are things that we can just start to resume again and get back going from where we left off, and others that we have to catch up with, because there were things that we needed to do during that period of time that we couldn't do, and now we've got to go back and get all that thing and get caught back up to speed. And in order to do that, resources are required, perhaps above what may have been allocated before. Is there any thought to how and what in here that we might need to be able to catch up on, because we missed 5 months of being able to do this, and that we'd be able to put a lot of resources into it to get up to where we should be at this point in August of 2020, where we had kind of anticipated being, and other parts that we can just resume where we left off? And if so, what does that look like, and how can we help to resource that?
Chair, I'll take the first cut at that. I believe we're actually resourced to be able to catch that, and I do understand and I appreciate that difference between the catch up and resume. But I think as Mr. Stanford pointed out, and as I said earlier, one of the big pieces of this, not only the community piece, but it's our internal piece, and we've got the resources in hand with our team now. That team had actually been working, the broader community corporate team has already been identified, and we'd actually met before the shutdown. And so that can be a resume. That's not a catch up. And so we'd already put a lot of those pieces in place. The community consultation piece, I would suggest, is neither a catch up nor a resume. It's actually a recast to understand how it is that we're going to go forward. And as Mr. Stanford indicated, we're already looking now at some of the innovative ways that we can begin to actually piggyback on community partners to actually drill a little bit deeper and get a greater understanding and appreciation for what it is that we're trying to do.
Thank you. And Mr. Barrett, thanks for your identification of the equity component of this. I think that's really important as well. And if that can be captured in every way, I'm glad it's flagged so that it's contemplated as we move forward. I look forward to hearing more as time progresses. I think this is absolutely, it's not the next frontier, it's the first frontier that we had in terms of emergencies that we needed to address. And I hope we can continue to keep our foot on the pedal to be able to address this. Thanks for the report.
Thank you. I have Councillor Van Holst and Councillor Hopkins on the list, so you can take your hands down digitally, and I'll go to Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, just I have a couple comments about the evaluation tool. And one of them is that I think because many of the answers are going to be the same, it'd be good if there were check boxes there. I think it should be a very easy thing. Applying a lens, if we want to use that metaphor, should be quite an easy thing. If I get stung by a bee and I want to know if the stinger's still in there, I apply the magnifying lens and immediately I see if it's there. If I want to know what Dr. Tung's House of Horrors looks like in 3D, I just put on the 3D glasses and I see it. So when we offer this tool, people should be able to tell really easily how their project is stacks up. And there's a great example of that just on page 29, where we're looking at different vehicles through this lens by showing their fuel economy, and then you can immediately see which one's the best choice. So that's the kind of thing we should be doing and suggesting for them. The other thing I'll say is I think we should add a question if equipment or supplies are being purchased from countries that have not agreed to CO2 mitigations, and indicate them by the check boxes below. That could be India or China. So there's people that are cooperating with Canada, and there's those that are not, and we should know who our allies are in this in this effort. And maybe the last thing I'll say about this is that we need to always be aware of the law of diminishing returns. So I see that we're looking at the potential of hiring consultants to do this, and that kind of concerns me, especially with the cost of $25,000. So carbon credits you can purchase for $20 a piece. So $25,000 is the equivalent of 1,250 tons of GHG offsets. That, sorry about that. Just letting an orange helicopter fly over me.
I think that's a first at a council meeting, Councillor. Congrats. That and the crickets.
Yes, yeah, and as you can see, I am actually participating from my backyard today. But you know, to spend $25,000 for a consultant, that's 1,250 tons of potential GSD reductions, which is equivalent of our first 7 years with the electric Zambonis. So we got to watch that we're not spending large amounts of money to get small gains, or losing those gains when we could have spent them in another way. Because as been pointed out, this isn't the only emergency we're dealing with. There's the COVID emergency. We've got what's probably a financial emergency and a housing crisis as well. So maybe not emergencies, but certainly crises we're facing at least 4 these days. So there's my concern. Let's make sure that in this we're being well aware of the law of diminishing returns, and maybe when we see that report on best practices for green and climate initiatives, that will provide some guidance to this as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the comments. I have Councillor Hopkins next.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Chair, and thank you to staff for this report. I know it's very busy times, and really appreciate the update. And I too see the challenges that staff have to deal with here, trying to move this forward. And I do want to acknowledge the work to date that has been done. It's great to have a team in place. It's good to see that there are potential opportunities already identified, and the lens that we're going to take into our next strategic budget is going to be the lens will be implemented. I think the challenge is how we're going to do that in this council and within our strategic plan. I think there are going to be challenges around the funding formula. I understand that there's no new funding available from the provincial government yet, and maybe that's something that we need to sort of maybe champion on. I want to acknowledge federal funding, I think, is there when it comes to the infrastructure, but as municipalities and the challenges that we have, the funding from other governments when it comes to climate change and dealing with it is going to be very important to how we as a municipality are going to move forward. So I want to sort of put that funding out there, that concern that it exists. But I really do want to get back to Councillor Turner's comment about that equity component. And thank you, Mr. Barrett, for maybe bringing that forward here in the discussion at SPPC, because it's really not identified in the report. And I think it's a really important component of climate change and equity and how we deal with all that coming together. I do want to address the concern that I see that is a big concern. It's been noted that this is being driven through by the community, and for meaningful engagement to happen, There are many, many challenges as we deal with COVID and coming out of COVID, but it's going to be vital to the recovery. I see climate change as part of our recovery process, and new initiatives and new opportunities and new ways of doing things, as well as the challenges. And again, addressing equity it's going to be a very difficult challenge for us as a municipality. But I think it's imperative that we kind of do something different in engagement. I noticed the 2 engagements that have already happened, one at the home show and the other one online. We tended to get more response when we went out to the community as opposed to asking the community to come to us. It's obvious that there is a lot of support for the need to address, to have a strategy in place. But it's also looking at these 2 surveys that Londoners want to change. They want to make a difference. And then that gets right back to the community. And it's how we're going to engage that. That, I think, is going to be the challenge moving forward. I'm glad to see that we could be looking at our boards and commissions to take advantage of going through them to do that engagement and to help facilitate us. But there's going to be sort of opening up the box somehow. And I really want to encourage staff and all of us to be open to a new way of doing things and taking on those opportunities as we recover. I also would like to thank staff. I know they made comments to AMO's consultation process back in the spring, looking at a greater involvement in mitigating and adaptation, how we as municipalities can do that. I think those things are going to become even more important, having other stakeholders in the province advocating for the challenges that we're going to be faced with at the municipal level. So I just wanted to make those comments and really underline the challenges around that engagement piece, and just want to thank staff for all the work, given all the challenges that are going on. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. I have Councillor Squire next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to put my voice in and put my 2 cents in, and maybe a different point of view than we've heard up till now. You know, one of the things I've done since this has happened, and Councillor Turner smiles already, you know, I just want to say that there's a lot of language that we may hear, that we have heard, that's on somewhat the extreme edge of both sides of the arguments. In other words, we hear people saying, there's no climate change, it's not happening, it doesn't exist. We hear other people, and I won't mention any names, they're well-known public figures, who go around the world saying the world is going to end in 10 years, or billions of people are going to die. And I've heard that also. Not from anyone at council, these are people in the world. What I want to get back to, and I hope staff gets back to it also, is real science, real explanations about the various environmental factors that are occurring in the world and how each of them interacts. Climate change is not the only issue occurring in the world right now. It is an issue, but it has to be managed with all of the various other developmental, poverty, housing issues that are existing in the world. So I, for one, when this debate goes on, I will try to stay in the middle area of this argument. In other words, I'm not going to deny that climate change exists, but environmental alarmism are saying, unless we do something today, we're going to have these catastrophic events happening in 5 years. You know, that's not necessarily the case. And I hate to break that to people. I had the opportunity to read a book by John Schellenberger called, and I'm sure some people are familiar with it, but it addresses those issues, and I've asked staff to have a look at it. But I just want to make sure that when we're looking for solutions, they are reasonable environmental solutions that a municipality can achieve, recognizing that there's larger challenges outside of our midst. That's all I'm asking as we move forward with this debate.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't have anybody else on the speakers list. See no one else. This is moved and seconded, moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Hopkins, the report to be received. I'm going to open this for voting. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salih.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kaibaga.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 12-0.
Thank you. We have no scheduled items. We do have 2 items for direction. I'll deal with them separately. The first is a request for an appointment to a 3rd term to the Greater London International Airport Authority Board of Directors. For colleagues' information, a director can serve up to 3 terms according to the rules, so this would be an appointment for a 3rd and final term. I'll look for colleagues to make a motion or provide some commentary on this. I'll go to Councillor Van Meerbergen and then Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd be pleased to move the continuation of Bill Graham for another 3 years as director on the Greater London International Airport Authority, specifically from August 1st, 2020 to July 31st, 2023.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. We'll get the language up for that. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Hopkins will second. You're also next on the speakers list, Councillor Hopkins.
I was going to second.
Perfect. Councillor Van Holst, were you just looking to make a motion or are you looking to comment on this?
Oh, I'm happy to make a comment through you, Mr. Chair.
Now's the time then. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, and I'm also happy to support this this extension with 90% loss in business. I think we need definitely someone who's got a lot of experience with the board already to get us over this very difficult challenge. We don't really need somebody new to be getting onboarded while we're trying to figure out how to get our airport sending people out again. So I think it's important for us to continue with Mr. Graham's service. I think he'll be the one who's able to give us the best advice. So thank you.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just with respect to this, we've had these discussions in the past, specifically with respect to board appointments and taking a look at, well, we just had a discussion about equity, and that discussion should be brought to all our board appointments and considerations as well. The way we get people to the table is not by holding a seat for 10 years. And so 2 terms is fairly significant. That's a long time. I recognize the bylaws of the corporation allow for a 3rd term, but to me that seems a little bit long, and I kind of wonder what opportunities they explored to see if other candidates might be interested in the position. So I'm not really apt to support this renewal. I recognize we don't have a lot of influence into this process, but I don't see the necessity of keeping somebody on another 3 years. I don't see it as disruptive to bring somebody else new onto the board at this time. In fact, actually, I think it would probably be advantageous.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Is there any other speakers? Okay, so what we have before us is a motion moved and seconded to reappoint Mr. Bill Graham for a 3rd term to the Airport Authority. Colleagues would have to defeat that if they're looking to move an alternate motion. Is there any other speakers on the current motion on the floor? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salih.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner,
No.
Councillor Pelosa,
Yes.
Councillor Kaibaga,
No.
and I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 10-2.
Okay, the next is a letter from Councillor Salih and myself on the London Community Grants Program allocations. I will turn it to Councillor Salih to introduce the letter and make any motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your support on this. It's great to work with you and collaborate with you as well, having had the opportunity to speak to staff on this as well. Colleagues, you've seen the motion previously circulated. I just want to add that there's just a small sentence that's also just recently included, and I'll just read it just so those who are following at home and that staff get that motion up on the screen. That civic administration be directed to remove any barriers that racialized and marginalized groups may face while applying for London Community Grants programs. So with the motion that's been previously circulated, really the goal is to empower grassroots organizations and those in the front lines in London who have the knowledge and passion to help us end racism and oppression in London. So I think what's great is that the city is providing leadership. We've taken a stand. We've made our position clear that racism has no place here in London and that we all have a responsibility to get the work done. But at the same time, what this motion does is really recognize that there's a lot of people outside of the walls of City Hall, and even us around the Horseshoe, who outside of City Hall have the talent, have the skills, and have a lot of great ideas. And part of the barrier is ensuring that there's an opportunity where the community grant funding can really help them leverage and do the work that needs to be done that some of us don't have the skill sets for. And I think this is an opportunity to close that gap. And, this is, in the past, we've heard of challenges for folks, when applying for community grants, whether it's previous councils. So I think this is really a way to really dedicate and make a commitment and putting the resources in place that are needed. And I know there's an important piece that we're also including, which is addressing it in the immediacy. And Councilor Morgan might touch on that, as well as the other piece that I think is helpful for colleagues is recognizing that today we're not looking at the allocated funds at this moment. But I'll turn over to Councilor Morgan, who'll be able to, as budget chair, maybe provide a little bit of background on that. But I'll move the motion and I'll look to Councilor Morgan to second it.
Thank you, Councillor Salih. And as I indicated in letter S, I'm willing to second that. If colleagues will indulge me, I'll just make two very brief comments on this, just from the chair, if I don't see any objections, and then I'll govern the debate or oversee the debate. Okay, I don't see any objections. So I'll just add two things. Councillor Salih is right. This motion has two parts in the drafted letter. The first relating to providing a different category to be eligible under the next multi-year funding stream from 2024 to 2027. That's because the current allocation has already been allocated under the current multi-year budget. So we're not looking to make any changes to anything that has currently been decided. The second part deals with the annualized stream and adding this category as qualifying under the innovation and grant and capital stream, which would allow applications to be made sooner rather than later, so that we could actually do something during this particular budget cycle. I will say there has been some questions in the community about the budget related to this item. Councillor Salih and I are taking a policy approach at this point. If someone is looking to change the size of the granting program itself, that could be done through the annual update or the budgeting process, either this upcoming year or in the next multi-year budget. So I know that there was a couple of emails from community members talking about us basically limiting the space for other applications from other community groups who've traditionally applied to the program. But really, the size of the pot discussion would occur at budget time. We're talking about the policy and what qualifies for the different streams at this time. So those are my comments, and I have a few people on the speakers list already, and then I'll look for others. I have Councillor Lewis and then Councillor Squire so far.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both yourself and Councillor Salih for bringing this forward. folks will know that I have been critical of some of the recommendations that have come out of the Community Grants Review Panel in the past. I am really supportive of what the two of you are bringing forward here. I see this as a good way to put resources towards an initiative or initiatives that the community will bring forward. I think it's really important that when we talk about racialized communities and anti-racism efforts, that it can't all be driven from City Council or from the federal government or from the provincial government, but there has to be a real grassroots driven part of combating racism. And here what we're doing is creating a window where the community has access to resources through a granting stream to help drive community-led initiatives. So I'm very, very supportive of this. When I think about some of the projects that I've had serious concerns about through the community grants program, things like paving a church parking lot, I see far, far, far greater value to the community in ensuring that some of the funding available through the community grant stream can be applied to initiatives like this. So very supportive. Thank you both for your work on this, and looking forward to the discussion. You know, in terms of the size of the pot, I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that we have a pretty big deficit hole already. What we're doing here is carving out a space so that there's a legitimate policy that says some of this money is going to that. And we will continue to work on what budgets look like in the future. Obviously, there's never enough grant money. Everybody would always like more. We could, I suspect, devote half the budget to grants, and we would still have organizations saying, well, it's not enough. It's not going to include us. I think what we're doing here is creating a space where it is going to specifically include a particular group of projects and that are going to have some real merit and can hopefully make a real difference in the community. So thank you for the work that's gone into this.
Councillor Squire, and then Councillor Hopkins, I have you on the list too.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A couple of things I just wanted to point out. I first of all want to express my appreciation to Councillor Salih, who reached out to me when he was going to bring this motion forward and made me aware of it well before it hit the council floor. Doesn't happen, and I'll be frank, I don't see that very often. But when I do, I just want to express that I appreciate it very much. And it is important for a number of reasons. It lets people know exactly what's being proposed. It gives us a chance to speak to people about it and have an informed opinion when we come to council. So I will continue to beat that drum until such time as I'm not here anymore. The second thing I like about this is already been mentioned. This puts the issue that a lot of people talk about at this horseshoe back into the community for action. That's important to me. I would much rather, frankly, hear the community tell me what they have in mind for expenditures of money after considering people in their community than me or other councillors telling them what they should do. So I'm very enthusiastic that it doesn't just cover any particular group. It speaks to the issue of diversity along with other particular issues and gives the community an opportunity to frame applications of including those elements for approval. It doesn't mean, from my point of view, that only projects that are entirely about that particular issue will be approved. It just gives an opportunity for that to happen and puts it in an arena where it can be approved on a common sense basis. So I am supportive of this, but I would not be supportive of this if it was merely us saying, well, we're going to spend more money. We're going to, in this time when we're experiencing the challenges, that we're going to take this allocation outside of the budget process and spend money today. So if that changed, I would not be supportive of this. But as of now, I am.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Presiding Chair. I would like to, through you, go to staff and ask the question as it relates to the process. If this moves forward, what happens and how does it come back to us? I'd like further information on the process that we are to undertake here.
Thank you. Through the chair, we are planning to come back already to the October SPPC meeting as we have a motion from council and direction through the last budget process to update the current London Community Grants policy, as Councillor Lewis referred to. So we will take whatever comes out of SPPC tonight in council as part of that review. So we'll incorporate that into our review and bring back proposed policy changes to the October 20th SPPC meeting for your review. And then those would, if they impact the annual 2021 innovation and capital stream, that will impact it when we go out for those applications in early 2021. And we have some more time to look at what that will look like for 2024 to 2027. So we'll do some municipal scans. We'll see what other municipalities are doing so we can come back with some really good informed potential policy changes for you.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that would be quite interesting to see what is going on within other municipalities. And I want to make sure that that we all understand the decisions that we don't make, that it's still going through the community review panel. And I just want to ask through you to Ms. Smith, is that the process? And just explain how that panel works a little bit more to us as well.
Thank you. Through the chair. So currently in the London Community Grants Policy, it speaks to prioritization of applications that align with council's strategic plan and align with community need. So that is some of the wording that we'll look at when we bring the policy amendment forward. So you're right, the community review panel makes the decisions, but those decisions are made on the policy that is approved by council. So we'll look very carefully at what that wording is, make sure that we have it right so that our priorities in our policy then align with the priorities when the community review panel reviews the applications moving forward.
Thank you for that, and through the chair, I think that's, I know we've made a change just recently to our strategic plan to allow for the anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, and anti-oppression, diversity, inclusion, and equity into our strategic plan. So that's, there's a lot of work that's gone on, and I'd like to thank councillors that are bringing this forward too, and look forward to the report coming back to us in October. Thank you.
Other speakers? Councillor Turner and Councillor Van Holst will be after.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the movers and for bringing this forward. I think it's absolutely one of those things we need to do to figure out how to support and incentivize a community-based activity. I think the community grants program is probably a good place to do that. I think there might be other avenues as well. I'm really not supportive of carving out a fraction of the budget. I would be more supportive of adding $500,000 to the community grant budget and saying, here we go. But I think there's a pretty significant opportunity cost. The organizations that are funded, and Councillor Lewis just spoke to this, talked about how government is not necessarily in the best position to get some of these initiatives going, and that by helping to fund the community organizations to do so, that's what the community grants program is about. And we need to recognize that there would be a fairly significant opportunity cost by taking $500,000 out of that granting process and allocating it to a very specific area. We didn't do that with the rest of the community grants process. So it's challenging for me to speak about this, because I certainly I think absolutely it probably warrants $500,000, but I'm not sure how that came to be, what that number, where 25% came from, how that was derived, what basis points towards that. I don't want to be overly bureaucratic and obstructionist. I want to find a way to make this happen. When I take a look at the evaluation criteria for the community grants program, it has the 4 areas: strengthening our community, building a sustainable city, growing our economy, creating a safe London for women and girls. I could see this as a 5th piece of that, where we're very specific, and there's a ranking criteria of this. But I think we want to make sure, and then also when we take a look at the granting criteria, there are some barriers in here that would make it very difficult for organizations, I think, that are being intended in this motion to be able to receive funds from being able to do so. stuff such as can provide proof of valid liability insurance up to $2 million. That's a difficult threshold to meet sometimes for some organizations. The active and registered voting board of directors list conducts annual general meeting, can provide current financial statements. These are not necessarily hallmarks of grassroots organizations, but of mature and established organizations, which sometimes are I guess not necessarily the ones that I see being the intent in the motion here. So I have some concerns with it. I can't support it in its current form just because of the reallocation of funding from the rest of the program. I think I absolutely support an increase in funding to the program to be able to support this, but not in this form. So perhaps my question might be for the mover or seconder, where did 25% come from, and why that number? What significance does that hold?
I'll go to Councillor Salih for that question from Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think it's important to recognize that, whether we go back historically and look at some of the applications, that didn't necessarily were successful, I think we recognize that we have a growing population here in London that has to face and has to deal with racism and racism and oppression. So I think for us to make a significant impact and to have an opportunity to do something where we can start to see true change, sooner rather than later, we have to make a commitment with significant funds. $500,000, though it's a significant amount of money in the greater scheme of things, it really isn't a significant amount of money. So by setting aside 25%, it allows folks to really bring forward quite a number of initiatives that can really help kickstart a lot of things that needed to be done in the community. I had opportunity to speak to quite a few people in the community who kind of expressed in the past and recently kind of what kind of resources they would require. And based on some of those numbers, $500,000 was a target, but not enough to really capitalize on what really needs to be done. I recognize that if colleagues don't want to support this, that's up to them. But I recognize that we need to do something now, and I want to move away from just words and take action. And this is an opportunity to do this. If my colleague is supportive of wanting to put in more resources, then by all means, bring it forward during the budget time, and we can have that conversation, and we can do that at that point. But what I really wanted to do was focus on the policy here today and ensure that there was an opportunity for us to start moving in the direction that's needed, and the commitment that we've made here around the horseshoe. But again, it's going to require money. This is, in all honesty, this would be, I think we need millions more to really address the concern here in London. And when you look at our stats here in London, hate crimes and things related to that in the communities that are impacted, we're seeing that the numbers go up, and we're not seeing the numbers going down in some regards. So I think we need to really do a lot more, and this is one opportunity to do this. If you want to bring it up in the budget time, happy to do that at that point as well.
I would just add from the chair, just as a piece of information, in the development of the motion, Councillor Turner, the focus was on the 25%, and as the clerk assisted us in the language, 500,000 was put in brackets so that people could see what the impact would be on the currently allocated budget. However, if the budget was changed, the budget process, it's the 25%, which was the effective part that we had intended, not the 500,000, and Councillor Salih and I had chatted about that. So I provide that as a piece of information as well.
Yeah, I appreciate the explanations. The 25% seems arbitrary. I do recognize that it does require significant funding. My big concern with this is that it's removing funding from organizations that are doing significant work in the community. If there was a place to take money from, this would be the last place that I would do that. I think there are so many places that we can reallocate funds for to achieve the same objective, which I completely and absolutely support. The way we're going about this, I can't support that. The objective is absolutely correct. The method is absolutely wrong. So hopefully we can find some other method to do this and accomplish this. But the community grants program has been under assault a few times from several members of this council, and I'm getting frustrated trying to defend it each time. but I think it's probably one of the most significant policy programs that we do, and I think it needs to be protected and augmented. And I think this is there's a way to do that, and I think this is the place to do it. But I don't think it's by removing funds available for other community organizations.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll thank Councillor Turner for his comments too, as well. He like myself was interested in an expansion of this program. I've thought at times maybe I'd like to see $1 million per term per ward for community decision making. I think it's really effective, and it's what our citizens want to be able to do. It gives them a chance to really get involved in there. And the problem then would be the 25%. If we just added some other priority and said we want $500,000 for some other initiative, then setting a percentage means that we would have to take 250,000 out of that. So I would be much happier if we could just say a minimum of $500,000 and leave out the percent. And I think that would have less unintended consequences on future changes to the project. And if for some reason the budget went down, you would still have that amount guaranteed. So that there's something I offer to the movers. Perhaps that's a friendly amendment. My other question was, it says it's an allocation for the period of 2024 to 2027. And I just hope that the mover or seconder would make a comment on that.
I'm going to hand it over to Councillor Salih for some comment. I'll just say that the reason why it says 2024 to 2027 is the current stream of the grants program has already been allocated. So the multi-year stream has been allocated through the multi-year budget, and community groups have that money committed to them. And so that's the next opportunity for the multi-year stream. Part B refers to the annualized component, which we approve each year. So A is really setting the stage for the next round, which is already allocated under this budget. Councillor Salih.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and you kind of already answered a large part of what Councillor Van Holst was asking. And again, we're not reallocating. All the current approved projects will proceed. This is a matter of making commitment to have a significant impact and to have the change that's really needed and driven. 25% is a starting point. I think we could do the work. I recognize if people want to add more money, then there is that opportunity. This is an important thing that we need to do. And I think, you know, I'll leave my comments just because I don't want to be able to speak more than once, you know, just to make sure that my colleagues have an opportunity to speak. So I just want to respond to Councillor Van Holst, and I'll speak later on the list.
Councillor Van Holst.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Well, this was, I'll just finish up. Maybe I have one more comment, but thanks for the answer. And I do like Councillor Turner's suggestion of trying to find more money, because that might allow us to take sooner action on this. Although it does allow our community to have some time to identify how these things specifically manifest in London. And then we can take some really targeted action to address those issues. But again, I like this. I like that we've set a strategy, and now we're trying to put some funds behind it and take some action. So thank you.
Okay, I know Councillor Salih wanted to wrap up, but I don't have anybody else on the speakers list, so I don't want to have him wrap up and then have someone else jump in. So I'll look to see who else would like to speak on this. Okay, Councillor Salih, go ahead and wrap up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again, colleagues. So I recognize that you know, this is a significant ask, but it's an important ask. I don't want to wait to the budget to really kind of send the message and to really let the community know that we're taking significant action. You know, and through the chair, I recognize that some people, you know, want to frame this as an assault on the community grants program, but I don't think that's a fair characterization. The reality is we're trying to do things that need to be done, and the work that is needed to be done is immediate. There's members in this community who on a daily basis are assaulted with racism, with hate. And I think for us, this is a strong opportunity for us to be able to respond to that and to put the resources and empower the community groups. I'm more than happy to support putting in more dollars in this area, but I wanted to make sure that we kept the focus, as you heard from my colleagues, and one colleague in particular, Councillor Squire, mentioning that the importance of the separation of the policy conversation and the budgetary items. And I recognize that because we are faced with a significant amounts of monies when it comes to you know, the deficit that we're faced here due to COVID and many other things. But the reality is this is one step in the right direction, and I think we have an opportunity to act. And I encourage my colleagues to support this. And if it's simply the monies related to it and making sure that there's more money, then you could still support this, and you could later on bring a motion or indicate that you're supportive of increasing the funding for the community grants program. But again, I don't want this to be characterized as an assault on the community grants, and I think that's a mischaracterization, and I don't think that was appropriate at all. Thank you.
Okay, I have no more speakers, so this is moved and seconded.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Turner.
Yeah, thanks. If I might just respond to that, it wasn't me by name, but in terms of assault on the community grants program, that phrase was with respect to past debates, not with respect to this.
Councillor Sully, you've heard that. I'm good with that if you are, and I certainly don't think the councillor was intended to reference it that way. So if everybody's good, we will continue with voting. I see no other speakers, so here we go, voting. Councillor Van Holst?
Yes.
Councillor Lewis?
Yes.
Councillor Sully?
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy?
Yes.
Councillor Squire?
Yes.
Councillor Lehman?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
No.
Councillor Pelosa?
Yes.
Councillor Kaibaga?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 11-1.
Colleagues, that ends the items for direction. I have on the added agenda, deferred matters and additional business, a communication from Councillor Van Holst about the Middlesex London Food Policy Council. I will refresh your memory that there is a vacancy on the Middlesex London Food Policy Council because when we looked for councillors willing to volunteer, there were none, and a call was put out by the clerks subsequently, and there were none, and now we have a councillor who is interested in serving, and I would look for some action on that. Certainly doesn't preclude anybody else from jumping in at this point, but we have an interested party in Councillor Van Holst in filling that seat. I'd look for a motion on this particular item if someone's willing to make one. Councillor Lewis, or Squire, I guess you were first.
I just move that Councillor Van Holst be appointed as our representative on that committee.
And I have Councillor Lewis willing to second it. Anyone else want to speak to this? Okay, moved and seconded to appoint Councillor Van Holst to the Middlesex London Food Policy Council. I will open that for voting, and we'll start with Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis?
Yes.
Councillor Sully?
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy?
Yes.
Councillor Squire?
Yes.
Councillor Lehman?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa?
Yes.
Councillor Kaibaga?
Yes.
Oh, and I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 12-0.
Any other additional business from colleagues? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. I'm looking to the screen. Councillor Van Meerbergen, you win. We'll do this by a hand vote. All those in favor? Oh, sorry, seconder, Councillor Lewis. All those in favor for adjournment?
The motion's carried. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. We're adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.